Welcome to Revisit Books podcast, where we turn books into bite-sized wisdom you can use every day. Today, we're looking at something pretty substantial, a real manual for life and work, you could say, forged not just from success, but maybe more importantly from some really tough, high-stakes failures.
Yeah, we're diving into Ray Dalio's principles. He's the founder of Bridgewater Associates. And this book, it's not just like feel-good advice. It's pretty much the operating system, the actual DNA that let him build this massive investment firm. I mean, starting in a tiny apartment and growing it over 40 plus years into one of the biggest private companies in the US. That's something else. It really shows the power of having a codified, logical way of doing things.
But that context is so important, isn't it? Dalio's journey is, well, it's remarkable. Started trading when he was just 12.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? And then Bridgewater at 26, keeping that going for decades, especially in finance. That takes a certain kind of learning process, an intense one.
Oh, totally. And the book really reflects that whole journey. It's structured, life principles, work principles. And it starts with this short autobiography bit, where I'm coming from. He's very open about it all. And he's quite clear about why he's sharing this now. He sees himself moving into a different phase, less about his own success, more about helping other people, other organizations be successful, passing on the knowledge, almost like a legacy.
Right, so it's not just a collection of nice sayings. It sounds much more systematic. When Dalio talks about a principle, what does that actually mean in his world?
Okay, so for him, a principle is a fundamental truth. It's something that acts as a foundation for how you behave. The idea is you can use it over and over in similar situations to, guide your decisions towards your goals, systematically. It's not vague. It's meant to be a really explicit criterion. You could almost think of the whole book as this collection of recipes for making decisions. So instead of just reacting when something happens, you kind of consult the recipe, right, to figure out the best next step.
A recipe book for decisions. I like that. And it's interesting that this whole system came about not from just winning, but from a really significant, painful failure.
Absolutely critical point. To win in the markets, Dalio knew he had to think independently. You don't get ahead by just following the crowd, right? That's already priced in. But being an independent thinker, betting against consensus, it means you have to be ready to be wrong, sometimes spectacularly wrong. His most famous example was back in '82. He predicted a huge economic depression, bet big on it, and was completely wrong, nearly wiped out Bridgewater.
Wow. So that near disaster, that intense pain of being wrong and almost losing everything, that was the trigger.
It was the turning point. Before that, his mindset was basically, I know I'm right. Confidence, maybe overconfidence. But after that massive failure, it shifted. He started asking, okay, how do I know I'm right? That change from just asserting to actually questioning, that required a huge dose of humility. Humility to balance out the sheer audacity you need to bet against the world. He realized his own blind spots could kill him if he didn't figure out a way to see them. #tag2. Who is this knowledge for?
So this whole system, this operating manual, it really grew out of survival in a high-stakes game. Given that origin story, who's the ideal reader? Who really stands to gain the most from digging into these principles?
Well, Dalio would probably argue they're universal. But yeah, the material seems to hit home hardest for maybe 4 kinds of people. First up, anyone who's just intensely curious about learning itself, about mastering the process of getting better.
The learner, you mean?
Yeah. Exactly. People who see mistakes not as personal failures, but as data, crucial data. Dalio frames pain as this necessary signal that something's wrong. It's the trigger for learning, for evolving. So if you're okay with the idea that struggle is actually productive, that the real goal is improvement, then this will resonate. It's about building a personal learning machine that just gets better and better.
And it makes sense then that it's vital for the independent thinker, the entrepreneur type. Betting against the consensus is their whole game.
Right. In any really competitive field finance, tech startups, even cutting-edge science, you only get exceptional results by being original. Doing what everyone else does gets you average. So you must be prepared to be wrong. And more than that, you need systems. Systems to limit the damage when you are wrong, and systems to make sure you learn as much as possible from those mistakes. It's about being bold, but smart about managing your own fallibility.
I also found his idea of the self-reflector really powerful. This idea of looking at your own life like an engineer looking at a machine.
Yeah, he's definitely talking to people who want to understand those deep underlying cause-effect relationships that drive success. But the really radical part is that perspective shift. He wants you to step outside yourself. Most of us operate from the worker you, right? Reacting in the moment, emotionally driven. He wants you to activate the designer manager you. The logical part that looks at the machine, your life, your work objectively, identifies the flaws without getting upset, and then fixes the design.
But isn't that hard? Like,
Yeah.
really hard. We try all the time to integrate our feeling selves and our thinking selves. Is splitting them like that sustainable? Or is it just for, high-pressure finance guys?
It is hard, no doubt. But Dalio sees it as essential for rapid progress, for evolution. You don't get rid of the worker the designer manages the worker. See, the designer isn't supposed to feel bad that the worker messed up. The designer should actually be kind of excited to find a flaw. Because now you can improve the machine. If the worker part of you just isn't good at something, the designer doesn't beat themselves up. They figure out a workaround, automate it, delegate it, build a system, get training. It's radical objectivity turned inward.
That separation, it allows for some pretty ruthless self-improvement, doesn't it?
Exactly. And the final group, the relationship builder. Dalio really stresses that principles aren't just for work or decisions, they govern interactions too. He argues that people who share clear, explicit principles connect better. They build meaningful relationships. When principles are different or worse, unspoken, that's where you get constant friction and misunderstanding. So being really clear on your own principles, that's like the blueprint for how you interact with others effectively.
Okay, so if principles are the recipes, Dalio's saying we need to be brutally honest about our ingredients, especially the tough ones like reality and failure. Let's get into some of the core lessons here, starting with his fundamental philosophy.
Right. The absolute foundation is what he calls hyperrealism. He sums it up with this equation. Dreams plus reality plus determination equals a successful life.
Now, this isn't about being negative or cynical. It's more like grounded ambition.
Dreams plus reality plus determination. Okay, the reality part sounds like the tricky one.
It really is. Being a hyperrealist means you have to understand reality, accept it, and work with it, even when reality is harsh or, just not what you want it to be. If your dreams are based on wishful thinking, you're setting yourself up to fail. You've got to choose your goals based on what's actually true about the world and, importantly, about yourself. Which loops back to his very first principle. Think for yourself. Decide, 1, what you really want, 2, what's actually true, and 3, what you need to do to get #1 given #2. And that systematic thinking gets formalized in his 5-step process. This is like the engine for continuous improvement, right? Let's walk through it. Step 1, have clear goals.
Yeah, and like we said, harder than it sounds. Because you have to sort out your real goals, the things you need for genuine fulfillment, from just desires, the stuff you want right now, like scrolling social media or eating junk food. Dalio says maturity is basically being able to say no to good options so you can chase the truly great ones. Prioritization is key. You can't do everything well. Focus on what really matters.
Okay, step 2 really hits home. Identify problems. Why is he so adamant that we should almost seek out problems and pain?
Because pain is the signal. That's the core idea. If you're not hitting obstacles, if you're not feeling some kind of pain or discomfort, it probably means you're just coasting in your comfort zone. And if you're coasting, you're not pushing your limits, you're not growing. Pain is just a message. Something's not quite right here. Your system, your approach, it's suboptimal. Avoiding the problem means you're avoiding the truth, avoiding the chance to learn. You need to build the strength to run towards the pain because facing it is what kicks off reflection and improvement. The goal isn't to avoid failure, it's to fail well. Learn big lessons without getting knocked out of the game.
Right. So once you face the pain, identify the problem, the really heavy lifting starts. Step 3, diagnose root causes. This is where that designer mindset comes in, isn't it?
Exactly. You have to shift gears, look for patterns, not just isolated incidents. Did you miss that deadline because you had a freak bout of flu? Okay, maybe that's random. Or did you miss it because your whole planning process is a mess? That's systemic. You have to figure out, is this a weakness in me, the worker? Or is it a flaw in the design of my system, my workflow? And this is where that radical objectivity gets, brutal. If you find a flaw in yourself, the designer part of you shouldn't get defensive. It should be almost pleased, because now you know what needs fixing.
Okay, let's make that concrete. Say my designer self realizes my worker self is terrible at email management and it's causing issues. How does the designer fix that without just, firing me from my own life?
That's right. Well, that leads straight into step 4, design a plan. And this is where system thinking really shines. If the worker part has a weakness, the designer has to build a system to compensate or force the right behavior. So for the email mess, maybe the designer mandates a new rule. All client stuff must go into a project management tool immediately. No exceptions. Bypass the chaotic inbox altogether. The plan needs to be super specific, like Dalio says, like a movie script. Who does what, when, how. Designing comes before doing. A bad design guarantees bad results no matter how hard the worker tries.
Makes sense. Design first. Then step 5, push through to completion. All the great plans in the world mean nothing if you don't execute.
This is where discipline comes in. Grit. You need good work habits. You have to constantly connect those small, maybe tedious daily actions back to the big goals they serve. If you lose sight of the why, you'll inevitably drift during the execution phase. The whole 5-step process. It's a loop, an evolutionary loop. Goals, problem spain, and diagnosis, design, execution, better goals, and repeat.
And that whole loop mirrors what Dalio sees in nature, right? Evolve or die. The things we chase, money, success, they're just motivators to get us into that loop.
He calls them the bait.
Yeah. We chase the bait, and that chase forces us to struggle, adapt, learn, get stronger. But the real reward, the lasting satisfaction, it isn't catching the bait. It's the evolution itself, improving your own machine, mastering challenges. That's the deep win. That's what really sticks.
Okay, so the 5-step process is the path forward. But we all know we get stuck. Dalio points to 2 big psychological roadblocks.
Yeah, the ego barrier and the blind spot barrier. The ego barrier, that's our deep-seated need to be seen as capable, and it makes us hate admitting we're weak or wrong. It's emotional. The blind spot barrier is more cognitive. We literally can't see the world objectively. We're trapped in our own perspective.
And his cure for both of these is this concept of radical open-mindedness, which is more than just saying you're open-minded. It's a sincere, deep-down belief that you might be wrong. That you might not have the best answer. It comes from genuinely worrying more about getting the right outcome than about looking good. When the fear of missing out on a better way becomes stronger than the fear of being wrong, that's when you achieve radical open-mindedness.
He even points out a language difference, doesn't he? How you can tell closed-minded from open-minded people.
Yeah, it's a neat tell. A closed-minded person often says something like, look, I could be wrong, but here's my opinion. They use that I could be wrong as a sort of disclaimer before digging in their heels. An open-minded person genuinely believing they might be missing something follows I could be wrong with a question, like I could be wrong, what am I missing here? Or how do you see it differently? They're trying to see through the other person's eyes.
That vulnerability, that willingness to be wrong, it opens the door to what he calls thoughtful disagreement and building an idea meritocracy.
Exactly. Look, if 2 smart, reasonable people look at the same facts and come to opposite conclusions, logic says one of them must be wrong, or maybe both are partially wrong. Thoughtful disagreement isn't about winning an argument. It's a collaborative process to figure out what's true. In an idea meritocracy, the best idea wins based on logic and evidence, not on who has the fanciest title or shouts the loudest. You have to stress test your thinking against the smartest people you can find who disagree with you.
But, okay, in a real meeting, if everyone's disagreeing thoughtfully, how do you actually make a decision? Especially if, say, a junior person has a brilliant point but lacks experience. How do you weigh all that input?
That brings us to a really critical and maybe controversial tool. Believability weighting. The core idea is simple. You do not treat all opinions equally. You give more weight, more believability to people who meet 2 criteria. 1, they have successfully done the thing you're discussing at least 3 times. Proven track record. 2, they can explain how they did it clearly and logically. They need the track record and the reasoning. Experience alone isn't enough if you can't articulate the why.
So you're literally scoring people's input based on their demonstrated competence and logic. That sounds potentially awkward, socially difficult to pull off.
It is difficult. That's why radical open-mindedness is the prerequisite. If people don't have that, they'll feel insulted if their opinion gets less weight. But if everyone genuinely shares the goal of finding the best answer for the group, then believability weighting just becomes a logical tool to increase the odds of success. It's about the mission, not the ego.
There's that incredible personal story he tells about his own health scare that just perfectly illustrates why this is so crucial, even life-saving.
Oh, yeah. The esophagus story. It's powerful. It shows you can't just blindly trust even the most credentialed expert. He had this serious condition, went to 3 top specialists. Dr. 1 suggested basically monitoring it. Simple. Dr. 2, head of surgery at a famous hospital, recommended incredibly radical surgery, removing his esophagus and stomach, with a 10% chance of dying during the operation and a high risk of major complications if he survived.
That's terrifyingly different. Just monitoring versus catastrophic surgery.
Right. Then Dr. 3, another world expert, offered a totally different diagnosis. Said it was a much simpler, manageable condition needing regular procedures, but nothing like removing organs. And the key part, when Dalio tried to get the first two doctors to really debate their different views, they were initially hesitant. Professional courtesy, maybe. Didn't want to directly contradict each other. Dalio had to force the thoughtful disagreement, make them defend their logic, compare their evidence. He had to triangulate their believability.
And if he'd just gone with Dr. Tu, the famous surgeon, based on title alone, his life could have been ruined unnecessarily.
Exactly. It's stark proof. Even the most believable people can be wrong. You have to be open-minded enough to get multiple credible views, and then you have to use thoughtful disagreement to dig for the truth. Even if it means pushing back against authority, it literally saved him from a potentially disastrous surgery.
That level of rigorous thinking, forcing the disagreement, it leads right into how Bridgewater actually operates day to day, turning these decision rules into actual algorithms. The machine idea becomes literal.
Yeah, this was a huge breakthrough for Dalio. He realized that pretty much any decision he made repeatedly could be broken down into criteria. A principle, or a set of principles, and if he could write those down clearly enough, precisely enough, he could turn them into computer algorithms. The results were apparently pretty stunning. The computer, crunching way more data, way faster, and crucially with zero emotion, could often make better investment calls than the very smart humans.
That unemotional aspect is key, isn't it? Especially in volatile situations like market crashes where human instinct is just screaming panic.
Precisely. The algorithm doesn't feel fear or greed. It just executes the logic. And Dalio's big insight was that this isn't just for finance. He believes converting decision rules into algorithms will eventually change how all sorts of organizations, maybe even individuals, make complex, high-stakes choices, taking the bias out.
Okay, so applying this machine thinking to the organization itself. Dalio says an organization is basically a machine with two main parts: the culture and the people. Let's talk culture first. What makes a great culture, in his view?
Non-negotiable foundation. Radical truth and radical transparency. Everything has to be out in the open. It's designed to force problems, disagreements, weaknesses, screw-ups, everything right to the surface. No hiding, no politeness covering up issues, no back-channel maneuvering.
Radical transparency. Again, sounds potentially brutal. Constant conflict, maybe? How does he argue that making people potentially uncomfortable is better?
His argument is that hiding the truth, the alternative, is always worse in the long run. He tells this story about when Bridgewater was considering spinning off their back office operations. A really sensitive strategic move, most companies. They'd keep that secret among senior managers for months, right? Dalio's culture demanded they tell the entire back office staff immediately, even though they hadn't made a decision yet. They basically held a town hall and said, look, we're thinking about this. We don't know if we'll do it. Here's why.
Admitting total uncertainty to the people most affected. Why do that?
Because if they hadn't, rumors would have started. Whispers, speculation, paranoia. That's way more damaging than knowing the uncertain truth. For people who can handle it, Dalio argues that radical transparency actually becomes more comfortable over time. You know where you stand. You operate in a world of facts, not fog. It definitely requires thick skin, but it makes truth the most powerful currency.
Okay, so that's the culture. What about the second part of the machine? The people. How does this system account for the fact that humans are, well, human, messy, different emotions?
It starts by acknowledging those differences are real and important, but they need to be understood and managed. Dalio talks constantly about the two U's, that logical higher-level brain versus the emotional, reactive lower-level brain. Understanding your own wiring and the wiring of others is crucial for putting people in the right spots.
And they actually use tools like psychometric tests, Myers-Briggs type stuff, to try and quantify these differences.
Yeah. Take something like thinking versus feeling on the Myers-Briggs. A strong thinker prioritizes logic, objective data, great for roles needing ruthless analysis, maybe system design, maybe even surgery. A strong feeler prioritizes harmony, empathy, how decisions impact people. Much better suited for roles like HR, maybe teaching, customer relations. The system fails if you put a strong feeler in a job where they constantly have to deliver harsh, objective criticism, especially to people they like. You have to align the person's innate wiring with the demands of the role.
This objective measurement also helps identify those rare people he calls shapers.
Right. Shapers are the ones who can take a bold vision and actually make it happen. They connect the dots from idea to reality. Think Steve Jobs, Elon Musk. Dalio studied them and found common traits: intense curiosity, very independent thinking, often borderline rebellious big dreams, but also practical and incredibly determined. It's like visionary plus practical thinker plus determined, all rolled into one.
And they often have a trait that can be misunderstood related to how they prioritize.
Exactly. They often score low on what standard tests might call concern for others. Now, this is critical. It doesn't mean they're unkind or malicious. It means that when faced with a choice between achieving their grand, potentially world-changing vision and making an individual person feel good in the moment, they will choose the vision every time. That laser focus, that willingness to push past individual discomfort for the sake of the goal. It seems necessary to build something truly new against all odds.
So how does this all work in practice? Managing this complex machine, this potentially tough culture, how do they gather the data to make it objective?
The manager's role is like being the engineer of this machine. You're constantly comparing results to goals. Is a failure because the design is flawed? Or is it because the person in that role isn't the right fit or isn't performing? To get objective data for this, they use tools. The most famous one is probably the dot collector.
That's the app they use during meetings, right?
Yeah. As a meeting is happening, people use this app on their devices to give real-time feedback, positive or negative dots on specific attributes. Things like logical reasoning, speaking up, staying on topic, open-mindedness. You see who gave the dot, and it all aggregates instantly. It forces everyone to think about the qualities of the contributions, not just the content, and to see how others perceive them. It makes that believability weighting happen live, based on observed behavior.
Wow. That sounds like a permanent public performance review happening constantly. How do you keep people motivated, creative, human when they're being rated like that all the time? Doesn't it just drive away talented people who can't handle that constant scrutiny?
That's absolutely the challenge and the trade-off. The system is tough. It definitely filters people. If your priority is looking good, protecting your ego, you probably won't last. But the intent, at least as Dalio describes it, isn't to punish. It's to accelerate learning and ensure objectivity. Because the feedback is tied to specific observable behaviors and data points, the idea is it feels less personal, more diagnostic. If your dot profile consistently shows you struggle with details, the system highlights that not to shame you, but so maybe you and management realize you're better suited for big picture strategy.
And this data feeds into another tool, the baseball cards.
Right. These are like detailed, objective profiles for each employee. They synthesize performance data, dot collector feedback, psychometric results, listing strengths, weaknesses, track records. The analogy is simple. A baseball manager uses stats to decide the batting order, right? You don't put your weak hitter in the cleanup spot. Similarly, the organizational engineer uses these baseball cards to match people to tasks and roles based on their proven abilities and wiring. It aims to take the guesswork and bias out of staffing and assignments, making it all explicit. Hashtag tag true or for. Closing thoughts.
So when you boil it all down, this whole complex system seems built on a pretty simple observation. The same kinds of challenges just keep coming up again and again.
That really is the core message. Dalio calls them another one of those. Whether it's a market panic, a team conflict, a personal setback, chances are it's a variation on a theme that has happened countless times before. Because these patterns repeat human nature, economic cycles, group dynamics, having a solid set of principles gives you a reliable way to handle almost anything life throws at you. Success, in this view, isn't about being some kind of superhero. It's about consistently applying effective principles and learning relentlessly from the struggle that inevitably comes.
And you mentioned earlier, chasing goals is the bait, but the real reward is the evolution that comes from the struggle. What's Dalio's final word on struggle and fulfillment, especially for people who've achieved enormous success like him?
He's very, very clear on this. Even the most successful people, by any external measure, still face constant struggle. Often more struggle because the stakes are higher. They aren't necessarily happier. True fulfillment, he argues, doesn't come from getting the bait, the money, the status. It comes from the process, from overcoming the difficulties, from the personal growth that results. Struggling well, learning from it, that's what builds your capacity, your resilience. It makes the good times better and the bad times less damaging.
So the message for you, the listener, isn't just go copy Ray Dalio's principles.
No, definitely not. In fact, that's his final crucial point. You must define your own principles. He wants you to consider his framework, sure. Consider other frameworks. Test them against your own experiences, your own reality. Then build your personal set of principles. Write them down and commit to following them systematically. That combination, deep thinking, disciplined action, and that radical open-mindedness to keep refining them, That's the path he lays out. That's today's breakdown. While this discussion cannot replace the book's full text, it can offer a glimpse into its teachings. I hope you found this discussion helpful, and I look forward to sharing more. Let me know what book next you want to discuss.